Welcome to the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society. Welcome to ITSPmagazine. Knowledge is power, now more than ever.
All righty, here we go. This is Redefining Society podcast, once again with me, Marco Ciappelli. And today I have a really a fantastic guest that we had the chance to chat a little bit before hitting the record button. And he's like, I wanna say he comes from different culture, has a vision of the world that already fascinated me, on top of being originally from one of my favorite country in the world, where a lot of culture actually come together, which is Singapore. Like I said, he's been traveling. He's well known for what he does, and he's going to tell us what he does. His name is Emmanuel Daniel, and we're going to talk about his book called The Great Transition, The Personalization of Finance is Here. So I think it's going to be a very global conversation, touching on culture, touching on technology, and of course on our everyday life as human. So let's start with the human in the conversation. Emmanuel, welcome to the show.
Marco, thank you for having me on. I'm a fan of the conversations you've had with other people.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm very honored to hear that.
Yeah. Well, Emmanuel Daniel is the founder of something called the Asian Banker. I started it in Singapore 29 years ago now, 1996, so counting. And in that time, 29 years, we've ceased to be Asian and we've ceased to be banker. So, like today I'm talking to you from Dubai, where we have an office from where we reach out to Africa, for example. And I spent some time in Nigeria, in South Africa, in Uganda, and so on. We've become more global because, the transformations taking place in the banking and finance industry is global. And despite being called the Asian Banker, in fact, you'll notice on my book, the two people who wrote the foreword, I'm happy to say, one of whom is Barney Frank, the co-author, the former congressman, was the co-author of the Dodd-Frank Act, which regulates pretty much all of the U.S. banking industry, and he's a personal friend of mine, and a very dear personal friend of mine, and he wrote a very cantankerous foreword because we're always arguing about cryptocurrencies and decentralized finance. He belongs to the old school and all that, but I still wanted him to be the one to write the foreword because I wanted to capture a little bit of the sense of the industry. And the reason he's my friend is because like him and several of the incredible personalities in the US banking system, I get to know them because when they visit Asia, I have them all to myself. And so that's how the friendships start. Okay, so and we're called the Asian Banker, and we're no longer banker either because so much is happening in the decentralized finance world. And so maybe about 15 years ago, I first started honing in on the notion that I must write a book. But I wanted to make it a book that was substantive, and it was useful, to the industry. So writing the book in itself was a journey in trying to make sense of what innovation in finance is and how to wrap our minds around the new things that are happening in finance. And so the final product is very much a book about how to think about where finance is taking us. And so the final conclusion that I have in my book is that the personalization of finance is here. And what that means is we are fast coming to the day when technically we do not need intermediaries in our financial interactions, that Marco and I can, give money to each other, lend to each other, invest in each other without an intermediary, without a financial institution. And then for that, we have to ask, what do financial institutions really do? So the cover of my book has a picture of a cube of ice, and what I'm trying to say is there was a time when ice used to be sawn out of the lakes of Michigan and so on, and put on horse-drawn carriages and taken to the city. That's roughly what happens to your money in your wallet today. It swirls around the world twice. It's subject to inflation, exchange rates, bank charges, security, a whole range of things. So we are really not in control of money like we like to think we are. And we are quickly coming to a point where in payments, in wealth management, we are increasingly in control of how we handle our money. Now, a lot has to happen between now and the day when personalization finally arrives. But just by putting in place several principles, I'm trying to help the general reader actually, but also the banking. I'm trying to help the general reader, but I'm also challenging the banking industry that in how they need to think about disruptive changes and where and what they need to do. So for the general reader, you'd find that there are some important parts that the journey has to take. And one of it is I'm saying that the platform era is fraying at its edges. It's coming to an end, and we're entering in technology terms, okay, not in financial industry terms. We are now entering a phase where there's greater personalization in technology. So everything that we know about what's being discussed in Web 3 and Web 3.0, which are really two different things, the battle to take transactions off, the HTTP that as we know it to be, and put it onto blockchains or crypto or tokens, and then to enable people to transact value with each other, and also exist in multiple realities. That phase is underway at the moment. Last year was the first year that Facebook said that it started to see a decline in the number of total users. Now, some of the decline is being captured by, say, TikTok, but as Facebook had about 15 years of a run, TikTok will have a shorter run because Facebook actually started in the desktop era, and it almost didn't make the transition into mobile. In fact, the Chinese players were quicker on mobile than the original desktop players. Okay, Facebook and all the others, even Amazon, right? It had to create new interfaces when it moved into mobile, and also the whole relationship changes. And now we're entering yet another phase, which is Internet of Things, where not all transactions need to be centered on the mobile device. They will increasingly be distributed, and the distributed data points are all going to collate so much data that's going to become valuable to the financial services industry. So you see how I'm constructing the whole story of the future of finance. And from there, we then can start seeing yet another point that I'm making in the book, which is the financialization of everything. I'm
gonna stop you for a second here because you've already thrown so many different aspects that is going to affect our life. It's already affecting our life, and I keep asking myself when you started that you said, I've been brewing this idea of this book for many, many years. And I'm thinking, like, if you wrote this book, let's say 10 years ago, or even 20 years ago, you could not write this book probably the way that you're writing it now, because technology has been going so fast. And even the concept of, Web 3.0 and blockchain and all of that, it's very still hard to comprehend for the normal user, probably thinking like, what does it mean? If you want to use the metaphor of the ice, now I'm making the ice in my own house versus not relying on a big distribution, right? And if I think about the bank's birth during the Renaissance with the Medici family and how they conceived the idea of, well, the money doesn't really need to be in that bank. It could be a ledger between two banks. So take all of this and take it now into AI, mobile. I mean, how do you see, and then we go back into the technology that you see allowing all of this, but do you see the users adapting to this? Because I feel like there is an entire generation shift here from analogs to digital natives and now blockchain natives. While maybe, I don't know, the older generation is not really ready for this. So I don't know, what do you see to be the I'm going to say the adoption of all of this by everyone?
This first book was actually the second book I had in my head, but I needed to get it out because I was in the banking industry, and I really need to have had to have a cathartic experience of just getting it out. So I've got the book out, right, and now I'm writing my first book as a second book, right, which is the winning civilization, which is how society itself is evolving. That's the original idea I had, which is that society as a whole, with or without technology, was increasingly becoming individualistic. Central, the me factor was becoming huge. In fact, by the way, there is already a book in the market. It's called The Sovereign Individual, if I'm not mistaken. Someone pointed it out to me, and I looked at it and said, oh my goodness, they've thought about the same. I mean, there are other people thinking about the same idea as I am. Except that when I wrote my book, I completed my book when I came across that book, and they said nothing about finance. And so, and the idea that, two different groups of people could be thinking about the same thing, but from different angles, was very good. But in terms of civilization itself, the short story is this. Civilization as it was in the Bronze Age in the Mediterranean basin, we were highly communal. And then, not we, I wasn't there, or I'm not, from that part of the world, but society, civilization was, very communal. The Greeks, the Romans, and so on. The more north it went, it became increasingly individualistic, and partially because of the geography. The population started to decrease. It gets colder. The greater reliance on yourself, and then by the time it goes to Germany and the Calvinists and Martin Luther putting out the 99 Theses on the wall, saying that religion is a personal relationship between God and man, no longer something that the church is an intermediary of, was a revolutionary idea, and that started the Protestant movement, and then it went up even more north to the Scandinavian countries, and then west to Netherlands and the UK, which then exported it. Now, what the US is the logical conclusion of a civilization that had become increasingly individualistic. And so the Calvinists, to them, individualism means accountability and a relationship with God. By the time it reaches the US, 200 years ago, and then today, it's self-gratification and consumption. So this march towards individualism is continuing, and technology is just abating it. So the thing is that the society needs to start thinking how to deal with, how to govern, and create accountability in a world that is definitely becoming highly individualistic. And today we have the technology that is, baking it right now.
I love how you explain this with this, going really back in time and really telling, this is just us being human, right? So as you're explaining all of this in my head, I'm thinking about one point that you make in the book, which is the financialization of everything. Because even when we were talking about individuality, I'm thinking like, what is that allow us to be individual is the fact that we have a way to make transactions that are not, I give you a sheep and you give me grain, right? It's I give you money. So the finance, in a way, the money, it's kind of what keep things together even when they're separate. And so I'm thinking, like, can you explain this concept of your finance, making everything, the finalization of everything?
You will already start hearing analysts in the US talking about this from a very different angle, but it's the same thing, which is that the US GDP used to be hard industries, manufacturing, services, and so on. Increasingly, finance is becoming an increasingly important part. The number is between 8% and 21% of the GDP, right? Now, the thing is that, and in the last, in the year 2013, the BEA, the Bureau of Economic Analysis, started tweaking the definition of what GDP constitutes, and that includes digital assets. That includes production of entertainment, movies, stuff like that, right? So we are becoming increasingly ephemeral. Now, what's happening in the markets is that the markets are increasingly looking for new data to trade on to create more markets, okay? And where is this data going to come from? It's going to come from all kinds of data capturing devices around the world. In fact, it was far back in 2014 that Jeff Immelt, GE, he said, in the future, GE is not going to be a manufacturing company. Our most important asset is going to be the data that's generated from all the manufacturing activities that we have. And then today, you see the Tesla car, that's a data machine, that consumes and creates and uses tons of data. And a lot of that data can be put on markets that is tradable by people who need to either trade in them or buy and sell them and use them for other purposes. So anything, okay, what I say in my book is anything that can be digitized can be made into data, and anything that can be made into data can be financialized. So anything that can be digitized can be financialized. Okay? And some of the analysts, I think Cathy Wood, for example, out in California, where you live, she says that, she and a couple of people say that it is not inconceivable that the US GDP, which is now $21 trillion, can become 45 trillion in the next 10 to 15 years, just on the proliferation of a financialized economy. And when you take all that is traded in the digital world, in the metaverse, all of that is going to start to be considered as economic activity, and then you start seeing a very different picture of what the economy is really all about. So that's what I mean by the financialization of everything. Now, not everything will be successfully financialized, but the world will go through a process of trying to financialize as much as possible. So the allegory that I gave in the book was, I think it was Jared Diamond who said in his book that man tried to tame all the animals possible in the world, but only about 17 of the large animals above 100 kilograms were tameable because of different reasons. The zebra wasn't tameable because it's a nervous creature. The lion wasn't tamed because it consumes too much. The input is too much. Not relative to not equal to the output, stuff like that. So we will go through a process of trying to financialize many things and then come to a kind of a plateau where we start to understand what can be financialized, what can't. And that's what I mean by the financialization of everything.
Wow, yes, that's a good metaphor right there. And I'm also thinking, what's the role of the big institution? Like you talk about the big animal, right? The elephants and so forth, and of course I think about, the big banking, the big organization. Are they the one that are actually pushing towards this transformation? Have they been resisting this transformation because it takes things away from them? Or who's driving what, and how is this traditional banking institution? Because when you read the news many times, like, the regulation wants to get on the blockchain. I mean, not on blockchain, but on the cryptocurrency. Many times crypto is depicted as risky investment, as black market used for nefarious activity. It's not really in a really good light, but I know that the future is there. You know that the future is there. So what is the dynamic there between resisting change and pushing change?
In 1900, if you looked at any photograph, you can Google right now to look at it. Any photograph of New York City in 1901, you'll see that there were lots of horse-drawn carriages and then one little motor vehicle. Okay, it was
one little car.
One little car, a motor vehicle. Okay, not even car. You can't even call it.
Yes.
Car, because they tried to make it look like a horse-drawn carriage with a motor. And just one, okay, and then everything else. And it was a nuisance because it stood in the way. It was heavy, it was noisy, it was not necessarily comfortable, it was slow, And then you then Google and say New York, 1920, and it's just 1910, okay, not even 1920. It was just the opposite. Everybody else had a car, and the horse-drawn carriage was like maybe one, in a way, and you find some old timers who would like to have one. In fact, today you still find horse-drawn carriages in New York, except that it's for the tourists.
It's a novelty.
So the transition that the banking industry goes through is like this. You and I like to travel, Macro, and you said this to me, that you've been to Singapore and all that. And every time we go to a new city, we find that there will always be this historical building that used to be the tallest building in town. Maybe it's a church cathedral, and then now they've got 100-story buildings right next to that, and it shrinks everything down. The banking industry is exactly that. The largest bank in the world today is $5 trillion in total assets. The asset management companies, okay, BlackRock is $11 trillion. So the industry has changed dramatically. And sure, Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies about $2 trillion right now, but they're growing. Right, so they're more chic, they're more contemporary, and they occupy a different part of town, and with all the promise of being able to grow further. So our focus is that what's going to happen to the banking industry? It's already started happening. The corporate lending market, the commercial paper market, is bigger than bank lending to corporations. Anywhere in the US and definitely in many other countries as well. The stock market has started to taper off in that since I think about 1995. It hasn't grown very much. The number of companies that take the public route to raising capital have sort of tapered off. So things are already changing on the balance sheet front, on the business model front, and the proliferation of new players. Then the question is, which field do you want to play in, and generate your wealth and create your own portfolio? So if you still think that the banking industry is what serves your need, even that is changing. So I have my own, because of the way I think, I could see something like Silicon Valley Bank coming to happening. In fact, I say in my book, when I was in 2017, I gave a speech and I said, the Kodak industry, Kodak as a company, practically invented the digital film in 1997, and there's a guy who actually made the camera, and it was the size of a toaster at that time, right? But it was the one company that couldn't figure out how to transition out of the product it loved the most, which was the 35mm film box. Yeah. And then what happened was 2000 Sony came up with a cyber shot. 2007 the iPhone perfected the camera on the phone. And 2010, Kodak went into bankruptcy. So then I asked myself, what would be a similar product that is beloved by the bank or the banking industry that you wouldn't imagine will turn in on them? And I said in my book, which was published last year in September, that it would be the deposit industry. And that's exactly what happened to Silicon Valley Bank, which is the deposit. There's such a thing as excess deposits, and there's such a thing as a mismatch of funds, and there is such a thing that if you don't know how to get out of the deposit business, it has got the ability to kill you as a bank. So the industry has changed on itself. The very core of the products that define the industry are today fully capable of destroying the industry because they're digital and they serve a different purpose.
What a great way to think about progress and inventing the same thing that's going to ruin your company because you can't figure out what to do with it. It's crazy starting to think about that. I find this whole conversation fascinating, and I know we're just touching on small elements, but you're doing a fantastic job in giving the big picture. And I'm scrolling through all the chapter and the paragraph you have in the book, and everything could be a question, but we don't have 3-4 hours. So I would like to take this last few minutes that we have, maybe with the chapter number 8, the one that you call reimagining the product, because it gives me a way to ask my favorite question, which is about the future. So how do you see transforming the future, especially if you can make some example of how you see people changing their own daily way to do transaction? I mean, we already know we're not really going to the bank. I don't even remember the last time I went to the bank, physically to the bank, right? I mean, I know it's there, but what other big changes do you see in these transition into personalization, personal financing, and digitalization? I mean, what's the world going to look like on an everyday basis? Are we going to do everything on your phone? Give us a futuristic look on what society will be.
So it depends on who I'm speaking to. If I'm speaking to the people in the industry, especially the fintech people, right, the people in financial technology, who thought 10 years ago that they were going to disrupt the industry, that banks will be dinosaurs and it'll be over. But that's not what happened. Today, just about every fintech company wants to become a bank. And then you ask yourself, hey, what happened? This thing was supposed to get transformed. And what happened was that the fintech industry was defining the products in the same language as the bankers. So like in peer-to-peer, for example, peer-to-peer, they call it lending. And once you call it lending and you call it a mortgage, you fall into the same trap and the same regulatory requirements that a bank does. So it is not surprising that the peer-to-peer players ended up becoming like a bank. But in the future, with a lot of data being transmitted, between users directly and also between institutions, we're going to get a very nuanced view of each other. And with a nuanced view, what we consider to be assets are going to change. Okay, so what I'm saying is that, and this is for your wealth management, viewers and listeners. What is going to change is that the idea of assets are going to change. Assets are, number one, going to be ephemeral. In other words, they're not going to be backed by any underlying, real assets like a house, for example. So, and especially with the new generations, call them Gen Z, whatever, they are willing to own assets for shorter periods of time. They're willing to share assets, and trade assets regularly. It becomes a fashion statement rather than a lifelong commitment of sorts. So as we move into that realm, the way in which we think of wealth has to change as well.
Wow, that's a big thought right there. The changing what used to be valuable and you were working for the house that was forever, right? Or the asset that was forever, and you realize that change is the only constant, really, and you just move it around. The entire idea of owning things, I think it's changed. Like, we don't own the car anymore. We lease the car. We just use it when we need it. You said sharing it. I mean, you go back a few years and you bring up this concept to, I don't know, an older generation, they'll be like, are you crazy? Absolutely not. But now we are sharing rights. We are sharing, Airbnb. We're sharing homes, literally. So that's
And the
a
more
lot.
data you have, the more it's easier it is to swap in and out of assets.
Yeah.
So the same data that's created ChatGPT, for example, we're trying to wrap our minds around it and say, oh my goodness, there's so much data. What do we do with it? It's because there's so much data, you can walk in and out of it. You can define your relationships more nuanced. Like if you wanted a 30-year mortgage, you can now break it down to 10 different portions with different types of lenders and so on, and live your life, and have something that is no longer called a mortgage.
Wow. So much to think about. Emmanuel, I really appreciate you coming here. And again, you just accomplished what I want to accomplish for me on the show, which is making people think, right? I want people to think more and ask more questions now, if they stick with listening to what we talked about, than when they started this conversation, because there's a lot of question, a lot of understanding and knowledge to acquire. So I would suggest, of course, people to read the book, The Great Transition. The Personalization of Finance is here. And of course, there will be links to your website, to your social media, to the book itself in the notes for this show. And I just invite people to get in touch with you. And please, when you have that next book, I really want to talk about that too, because that sounds really, really fascinating to me. So, Emmanuel, thank you so much.
Thank you, Marco. Thank you for this conversation.
I appreciate it. Thanks, everybody. Stay tuned, subscribe, and share this conversation if you find it interesting. Stay tuned for the next one. See ya.
We hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you learned something new and this story made you think, then share ITSPmagazine with your friends, family, and colleagues. If you represent a company and wish to associate your brand with our conversations, sponsor one or more of our columns. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey. You can always find us at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society.